Again, welcome back everyone. This is the second presentation on themes, and this one will cover shelter, ceramics, and architecture. The relationship between ceramic and architecture and clay and architecture is very often overlooked in histories of ceramics, and I believe it is a very important aspect of ceramic history where the contribution of ceramics have been notable and quite extraordinary. And here is an example of an African village with shelters made with recycled pots, and basically the whole community entirely made with clay and bricks and pots and other material like wood and so on, but mostly ceramic materials are used. I have shown you the Ishtar Gate in Babylon before. This is its reconstruction in a museum in Berlin, and also a contemporary restoration of the place in Iraq today. So the Mesopotamians were the first to invent glazes, as we have seen in the flux aesthetic, and a beautiful use of glazes are those glazed bricks that were used for the Ishtar Gate in Babylon and many other structures and buildings all over that part of the world. This is a scene from Egypt from pharaonic times showing the harvesting of clay for the making of bricks. So from murals like this we learn about the process used, the tools, and how things were made with bricks in Egypt. One of my favorite ceramic architectural object or work is the Risco Fountain in Mexico City. It dates from 1739-40, and it is entirely made out of ceramics that comes mostly from Asia, from China and Japan, that were brought to Mexico to be transferred across the country and then brought to Europe later. But those that stayed in Mexico and were chipped or damaged and so on were recycled in the making of the Risco Fountain, which also incorporates elements from Europe brought to the New World and elements built on site in Mexico City. So it is a mixture of American, European, and Asian objects all jumbled together in this wonderful composition called the Risco Fountain. There are many buildings worldwide that incorporate ceramic in the making of the form itself, usually bricks, and then covered with polychrome glazed surfaces and shards and fragments of all kinds and objects made specifically for the decoration of the building. The Temple of Dawn in Bangkok is one of the most notable examples. This is a detail here of the Temple of Dawn in Bangkok that you can see very clearly how some objects were recycled in the decoration of the building while others were specifically made for that building. And a temple in Vietnam operating under the similar principles. In France, the Hospice de Beaune in Burgundy has one of the most extraordinarily beautiful polychrome roof, and this dates from basically very late medieval, early Renaissance times in European chronology. Jolny tiles made in Hungary throughout the 18th, 19th, and 20th century and still made today, and the roof of the Cathedral St. Stephen in Vienna also demonstrate the use of polychrome tiles in an architectural context. Some churches have floors completely covered in ceramic tiles, and one of the most extraordinary one is in Capri in Italy, which shows the creation of the world. Here we see it with the furniture removed, but it is a church still in use today, and make your way to Capri and go have a look at it. And two other churches, one in Italy in Praiano and another one in Gandia, Spain. I believe that's not a church, actually it looks like a palace to me, but there it goes. So ceramic tiles are very permanent. They last a tremendous time even under wear and the passage of people over centuries. And that permanency of ceramics is manifested here very graphically in those large floor covered with ceramic tiles. Another interesting phenomenon in the field of ceramic and architecture is the use of tile stoves that we found in Germany mostly, but also in other parts of Europe. And those stoves are good because they can retain heat and release it over a long period of time. So they're very efficient and they're very beautiful as well. All kinds of interiors and exteriors of buildings are covered in tiles. This is an example of a sacristy from Portugal on the left and a kitchen in Nifenberg, Germany on the right. So those buildings have been covered in tiles for centuries. They're rained on, all kinds of things happen to them, and they retain their freshness, the crispness of the decoration. And of all countries in the world, Portugal is the one where tiles have been used in the most extensive fashion in many more buildings than anywhere else. And Portugal is famous for its use of tiles called azulejos in buildings. And on the right you have an image of the subway station in Lisbon, where people are reworking the historical connections to blue and white and painted tiles in a contemporary context. So I will show you some example of buildings from Portugal because they are really quite extraordinary. So mostly churches and palaces and civic buildings of all kinds, and whether it's on the exterior of a building or the interior of it, we find examples of those all over Portugal and all over Europe actually, and in many other parts of the world as well. One of the most extensive example of that is at San Vicente de Fora, which is a monastery and church in Lisbon, and there are literally thousands of square meters of blue and white tiles in that very large building and church, and it's quite an impressive sight. I'm just showing you a very, very small section of it here. And then the Portuguese went to Brazil and colonized Brazil, which is still a Portuguese-speaking country today, and they brought blue and white tiles to Brazil. So one finds those kinds of building in Brazil as well. And also in other Latin countries of the New World, like Mexico. This is Casa de los Azulejos, which means House of the Tiles in Mexico City. It's a restaurant now in downtown Mexico City. And then more and more and more examples of the use of tiles, at times quite extreme, quite excessive, like this palace in Poland, this one in St. Petersburg, Russia. And again, keep in mind that those buildings could be as old as sometimes 300, 400, 500 years old, and so on. I have introduced to you before the use of Asian porcelain in the context of palaces and porcelain rooms. One of the most celebrated is at Charlottenburg Palace in Berlin, which incorporates within a Baroque decoration wonderful example of porcelain coming from China and Japan mostly. In Capodimonte, Italy, which was the first place in Italy where porcelain was made in Europe, a whole room is designed completely covered in porcelain tiles. Not the ceiling, not the floor, but all of the walls except for the mirror elements, and the big chandeliers and all the sconces on the wall are all made out of porcelain. And then the designer of that room, Giuseppe Gricci, went to Aranjuez in Spain and did the same thing again at the Portici Palace there. So he designed and built two rooms of porcelain, one in Italy at Capodimonte near Naples, and one in Spain as well. And this is a detail here of the work of Giuseppe Gricci at this palace in Aranjuez. And in Aranjuez, even the ceiling is covered in porcelain tiles. And they are in the chinoiserie style, where there are many references to exotic Asia and China in the design of the room. And then he also was participating in the decoration of the Palazzo Real in Madrid and did a lot of porcelain inclusions in that palace as well. Around the same time, as a bit before actually, because this is before the rediscovery of porcelain in Europe, Louis XIV had a palace built in his garden at Versailles called the Trianon de Porcelaine, but it was all made out of earthenware because nobody knew how to make porcelain in Europe at that time. And during the French Revolution, the building was destroyed. So we have above a digital reconstruction and then some prints from the time showing that wonderful building that imitated porcelain from a European viewpoint. The Psun cheese store in Meissen in Dresden, Germany is completely covered in porcelain tile. Like every surface you see here is porcelain. Another porcelain room at the Munich residence in Munich, Germany. In the United States, Henry Mercer Chapman built his house completely covered in a house built out of brick and then completely covered in wonderful ceramic elements and fireplaces and walls and ceilings and floor. Everything is handmade, everything is covered in ceramics. If you make your way to London and go visit the V&A Museum, the Victoria and Albert Museum, don't miss the restaurant. It is again completely covered in Minton porcelain. The whole thing is in porcelain and it's quite a sight. And then as you make your way to the ceramic rooms upstairs, don't forget to take the porcelain staircase, which is also completely covered in porcelain made by Minton in England in the mid-19th century. Those are photographs of the Turkish bath on the Titanic, and the Titanic sank and it's at the bottom of the ocean now, and you see an image on the right taken in the Titanic underwater, and you can see that the Turkish tiles decorating the bath are still intact and quite fresh looking and haven't been damaged very much by being under the ocean for all that time. This is an example of encaustic tiles from medieval English at Winchester Cathedral. And you see some original tiles, the very worn and old looking one, and then some replacement for those tiles that were made in the 19th century. So those tiles are quite old, they're from medieval time, and over the centuries, the passage of people walking over them has mostly erased a lot of their information, which was replaced in the 19th century using the same material, the same technique, and very similar motif as well to repair the floor. So there are millions of tiles I could have shown you. I've included two examples I particularly like. The one on the left from Holland in the 17th century shows a variety of tiles where wood is collected, floated on river, the boat is starting to be built, and then finally at the bottom the boat is completed, and this almost cinematic sequence of transformation of a material from the natural wood to the cultural boat. The lateral repetition makes it quite exciting and quite interesting. Those tiles are hand painted, as are those on the right showing tulips, which are so characteristic of Holland when we think about that country. Let's move to Italy and Santa Maria del Fiore in Florence, the Cathedral of Florence, designed by Brunelleschi for the dome. The building was without a dome for quite a long time, and it is the architect Brunelleschi. Brunelleschi is also a very great artist who designed and finally built the dome, and the construction of that building is narrated in the reading for this week. And this had a tremendous influence on further development in the building of domes and arches. And Raphael Gustavino, working in the subway system of New York, used the principle of building devised and invented by Brunelleschi in his own architectural work. So Brunelleschi also collaborated with many other artists, including the Della Robbia family. This is an example of Luca Della Robbia's Tondi of young children at the Innocenti Hospital in Florence. And then example of the work of the Della Robbia in Pistoia and at San Miniato al Monte in Florence. You go to Italy and everywhere you see Della Robbia ceramic work. But Brunelleschi and Della Robbia collaborated in the Pazzi Chapel in Florence. It's quite a small building in the courtyard of a larger church, and it's considered by architectural critics to be the most perfect building ever designed and built. So bricks are very common in Italy as well. This is the Colosseum in Rome, the exterior, and we tend to consider Roman architecture to be made out of marble. But those buildings are usually brick buildings covered in marble, and the marble is just a veneer on the surface of the brick structure. The Pantheon in Rome, which is also a brick building with the interior dome being built out of cement, one of the first use of cast cement in the history of architecture. But what's also interesting is that to reduce the weight of the ceiling, the bricks give way to hollow pots at some point. And they only discovered that principle when there was a restoration of the building quite recently. So by inserting thrown pots in the making of the dome, it reduces the weight greatly and permits the construction of such a large dome. This is the exterior of the Pantheon, where you can see the use of brick in that structure. And Porta San Sebastiano in Rome, the walls of Rome are also built out of bricks. And Roman aqueducts, which again use ceramic in all kinds of very interesting ways. Some of you may want to do further research on this, but it's quite a fascinating thing to learn about. Roman flue pipes to take out fumes from the firing of bathhouses and other buildings as well. This is a very beautifully decorated one. We're moving to the New World now, to Mesoamerica and pre-Columbian time, and this is the pyramid at Comalcalco. It's a Mayan pyramid, and it's the only fired clay bricks building in pre-Columbian America. Pre-Columbian America uses a lot of stone in its building, and this is the only one made of fired clay bricks. What's also very interesting about that building is that there are no designs visible at all on that building, but when you remove the bricks, the designs are hidden behind the brick within the structure, and they are invisible for us to see. They're only there for the gods and for the spiritual world. In Peru, at Sechimbajo, we have the oldest raw clay structure built in the America, and this dates back thousands of years. So back and forth throughout geography and chronology, this is Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, dating from 360 of the Common Era. It is a late Roman building built during Byzantine times, and it's a brick building almost completely. In Moscow, St. Basil's in Red Square is also a brick structure, and you're not always made aware that those buildings are ceramic building built with bricks. It's only when you go see them up close that you realize how often brick are used in buildings. This is the earliest major brick building built in England in 1460, still extant today. The Cathedral of Albi, France, is mostly a brick structure, as you can see. And some houses from Africa built out of raw clay, and they could be restored and repaired. And the one on the right is very beautiful. You can see how the decorative element on its surface also serve as a stepladder to climb the building to restore it periodically when it gets damaged by rain. In Jenne, in Mali, the mosque is the largest raw clay building in the world, and it's built out of wood and raw clay, but on the roof of the building, the ventilation system is covered with fired clay lids, so it has a real ceramic element as well. And by removing and repositioning those lids on those flue pipes, you can ventilate the building and keep it cool when it gets too hot. In Mali as well, we have those Dogon granaries that were built for the storing of food material like grains and so on, and those are also built out of rock clay. In the New World as well, there are many rock clay buildings, mostly in Peru. This is the Moche Temple in Trujillo. And people would dig clay and build canals for the irrigations of the fields and the growing of foods. And with the clay dug from the canal, they would have to produce a certain quantity of bricks. Everybody had to make some bricks and bring them to the site as a tribute to the ruler. And those bricks would be stacked up to make immensely huge structures that then weathered when it rained and so on. And now they look like hills and mountains and so on. They're hardly recognizable as structures and temples, but they're made out of raw clay bricks. This is a detail here of the Moche Temple in Trujillo, Peru, that shows how it has been reconstructed by architects and archaeologists. So there are many of those structures all over Peru. They're found all over the country. And you can see here the use of vertical brickwork, which makes it more earthquake resilient. The fact that the bricks are positioned strategically makes the building more resistant to earthquakes. So there are all kinds of use of pottery in building construction as well, by introducing hollow pots in the building of the structures. Again, you reduce the weight of the structure, but it also improves the sound of the structures, so that when you talk or sing into those buildings, the presence of those hollow form within the wall helps with the transportation of sound in the space of the building. Now, standard bricks are very interesting as well. They have very specific proportions and they also have names. And it's interesting to be aware of that and to know those names and recognize them when you walk by a brick wall anywhere. So I have here sections on houses and building models. Again, those are found going back in time thousands of years in many cultures worldwide. They were made as funerary offering in tombs, most likely. But from those small ceramic models, we know how the building were built, what they looked like, how they were used, and their complexity and so on. And the actual buildings don't exist anymore. We don't have any examples of them. But from those small ceramic models, those from Knossos in Crete, we understand about Cretan Minoan architecture that we wouldn't have any example of otherwise. Example from Mycenae in Greece, from Cyprus again, temple models, from Israel. Often those were used as well in funerary rites for the containment of ashes or bone fragments from the deceased, or to contain offerings for the deceased or for the gods and so on and so forth. So they have multiple use. You find them in China a lot, in Han Dynasty and in other dynasties as well. Again, for the purposes of funerary rites and funerary offerings in tombs. But they give us a tremendous amount of information about the architecture of those cultures. One from the Cycladic islands of Greece on the left, and a neolithic house model from somewhere else. An example from Aniwa, Japan, Nayarit, Mexico, Hausa, Africa, Moche, Peru. Two examples from the Mayan world, from Mexico again. A vessel as a shelter and a temple as form and as surface. So the form of the temple is reflected in the shape of the vessel, and the temple itself is represented graphically on the surface of the object itself. And two examples from England, one from the 18th century and a contemporary one as a cheap souvenir ware. Let's have now a section on Antoni Gaudi and Catalan Art Nouveau architecture from Spain, because it's quite extraordinary how Gaudi and contemporaries and followers used ceramic, bricks, and polychrome tiles on extraordinary building found all over Barcelona and all over Catalonia in Spain. This is Casa Vincennes on the right. Vincennes was a brick manufacturer and a tile manufacturer, and he asked Gaudi to build a house for him, and this is the house Gaudi came up with. It's one of his first buildings. And Gaudi also collaborated with his friend Jujol, and it is Jujol that contributed most of the ceramic to the work of Gaudi. Actually, this is something that's not always acknowledged in the history of architecture and the history of ceramics. And this is maybe the most beautiful building they collaborated on, Casa Batlló in Barcelona. This is details of Casa Batlló, interior details and exterior roofs and chimneys. Again, the interior on the left, the skylight of the building, and the roofscape on the right. Tremendously beautiful and inventive and original. The chimneys of Palau Güell. Güell was another patron of Gaudi, and Gaudi made many buildings for Güell. And one of the most extraordinary things that Gaudi and Jujol did together is the park bench at Park Güell in Barcelona. And it's made mostly over a cement structure and brick structure, completely covered in recycled and broken tiles. So it's one of the earliest use of recycled material in a very beautiful decorative ceramic and architectural context. Here you have Casa Milà in Barcelona, again, a very celebrated Gaudi building. And the rooftop chimney are completely covered in ceramic mosaic. One of the most extraordinary building Gaudi design is the Sagrada School, situated next to the Sagrada Familia Cathedral, which is coming up. As a school for the children of the worker, building is an extraordinary building. And what's so extraordinary about that building is the undulating wall and roof, which create a self-supporting structure. And it's a very inventive form of engineering and very innovative architecture. And Gaudi was not just a great visionary and architect, he was also a great engineer, and he came up with tremendously original solutions to the building of structures out of bricks and tiles and ceramics. This is an example of that here from Suffolk, England. If you were to make that wall straight, it would be easily toppled over and fall, but because it has a wiggly, sort of curvy line, by using half the amount of brick, you get twice the structural strength, and this wall then becomes almost impossible to destroy. And those are principles going back quite far in time that Gaudi used in his buildings, and then Gustavino in the New World in New York used the principles of self-supporting arches invented by Gaudi, following in the footsteps of Brunelleschi at Santa Maria del Fiore in Florence. And all those extraordinary architects following one another make subsequent development of great beauty and efficiency. So let's have a look again at Sagrada Familia, the large cathedral still being built today in Barcelona. And it's mostly a stone building, but there are a lot of mosaic surfaces, as you can see on the right. And the spires of the Sagrada Familia, using colors and forms in a very symbolic way, are also covered in glazed ceramic tiles and mosaics. Now, contemporary of Gaudi in Spain, we also have Dominique y Montaner and Puig y Cadafalch, who are two different architects who also make extensive use of ceramic and glazed ceramic tiles and originally produced and fabricated ceramic elements to be incorporated in their quite extraordinary architecture. This is Puig y Cadafalch, Palau de la Música Catalana in Barcelona. And then a contemporary building built recently in Spain by Justo Gallego Martinez, which is entirely made with recycled material. No new material at all were used in the construction of this building. And again, all the way to today, people are following in the footsteps of Gaudi and his contemporaries to make great architecture out of ceramic material today. In Tianjin, China, I visited China House, which is an old colonial building that was quite recently completely covered in recycled porcelain material, vases, tiles, broken dishes, and so on and so forth. And the whole building inside and out and the surrounding gate is completely covered in porcelain. It's quite an extraordinary place. And again, this is somebody following in the footsteps of Gaudi, but maybe taking it just a little bit too far. And another wonderful example at the Santos Palace in Lisbon, Portugal, where Asian porcelain coming from China and Japan are used in the decoration of this ceiling. Now we have to move on to the Islamic world, because maybe it could be debated that the Islamic world is the culture that has used ceramic in the most extraordinary fashion in the history of civilization. This is the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, covered in ceramic tiles. And many cities in the Middle East are ceramic cities or clay cities. You can see here the use of bricks and tiles and ceramic in the city of Yazd in Iran. Another example of that in Shibam in Yemen, where most of the buildings are clay and ceramic buildings. The roof of Kashan, showing the roof of a bathhouse. Kashan is another city in Iran where ceramic and bricks are used extensively. And something interesting we find in Iran is Bagdir roof ventilation system. They build those structures on the top of buildings to suck the air out of the building. When the air enters the building, it passes over a pool of water in the basement of the building and cools, and then it is brought through the building by those ventilation system and cool the whole structure within the summer month. So a great invention of architectural elements serving a very specific purpose through the use of ceramic in Iran. The Bam Fortress, also in Iran, was recently destroyed by an earthquake. Those are more ancient photographs. Forts in Pakistan, in Uzbekistan, towers of all kinds built all over the Islamic world in many places, still extant to today. Some of those structures are hundreds, if not close to thousands of years old. This is one in Ganza from the 12th century, incorporating beautiful calligraphy and decoration. A mausoleum in Dangan, China, made out of bricks. In Turpan, China, there is a mosque and its minaret completely built of unfired clay bricks. In 1777 of the Common Era. And you can see from the structures that the bricks still look fresh and new, and they haven't worn out at all, although they are built with raw clay bricks that have not been fired. And the reason for that is that it almost never rains in Turpan. It is one of the driest places on earth, and building can be made out of raw clay and still survive centuries of wear and use. In Bukhara, in Azerbaijan, what is considered by architectural critique to be the most beautiful brick building in the world. This is the Samanids Mausoleum, dating from the 10th century. It is quite a small building for the funerary purpose of a family, the Samanids, and it's wonderfully decorated with all kinds of positioning of bricks strategically to catch light and shadow and create a very beautiful dynamic surface. Let's go back to Turkey again. The Blue Mosque would be a brick building to a large degree, covered completely with ceramic tiles. Another mosque in Istanbul. There are many of them all over Turkey and all over the Islamic world. I'm just showing you some example here of Iznik tiles with their very distinctive color and decoration combination. Some panels of those kinds of Islamic tiles found in the Doris Duke collection at her house in Hawaii called Shangri-La. So if you go to Oahu and go to Honolulu, make a point of go visiting Doris Duke house at Shangri-La, because it's a wonderful place and it is one of the largest collection of Islamic tiles in the America. Zellige tiles from Morocco are also something I describe and talk a bit about in the reading, and they're very distinctive, they're very specific. This is basically how they're made, from larger panels that are then cut and chipped and then assembled upside down on the ground, covered with a mixture of plaster that is then flipped over and attached to buildings of all kinds. This is an example of a minaret, again in Fez, Morocco, with Zellige pattern tiles. And it's quite an extreme use of mosaic tiles in ceramic, and some example of that in various buildings and palaces and so on. This one is in Samarkand. It's the Registan Square, the Ulugmeg Medrasa in Samarkand. Again, brick buildings completely covered in polychrome ceramic tiles. The most extraordinary example of that in the world, and possibly the most beautiful ceramic ensemble of buildings built anywhere in the world, is the Meydan Square in Isfahan, Iran. And those are example of those buildings, the domes, the madrasa, which are the Quranic schools, and details of the square here with the various buildings. There are palaces and mosques and schools all around that very large square. The interior details are of extreme beauty and intricacy and complexity. One of the mosques is maybe the most excessively decorated anything at all in the world. It is quite extraordinary both in its interior and exterior aspects, and all of this is basically ceramic. So there are so many of those mosques all over Iran. I'm just picking a few of them and then showing you example of tiles and details and so on. We will be looking in the next chapter on text, on the use of textual and scripts inserted into buildings at that time, but this is a bit of an example of that. And again, those buildings first started as raw brick buildings that then became fired brick buildings, and it's only later that they received tile decoration and so on. And there is a progression in terms of the influence of the structural aspects of the building and its decorative aspects as well. And eventually the structural aspect become pure decoration, and they create all kinds of complex surfaces and extraordinary relations between those form surface aspects that are so distinctive of ceramic history and ceramic vocabulary. So you can see here how the dome of bricks eventually inform the decoration surface on the mukarna of this Majidi Shah mosque. Example from Qom, from Yazd. The tallest dome building in Iran is the Sultaniye Mosque in Al-Jaitu. The Pink Mosque in Shiraz, built much more recently in the 19th century, so using progresses in ceramic technologies and new colors being developed to create this pink building. An example from Afghanistan on the left and another one from India. So the Islamic world is a global phenomenon, and we find extraordinary examples of their ceramic architecture worldwide. And this example from Baghdad in Iraq dates from 1983, and it commemorates the Iran-Iraq war that happened at that time. It was built by Saddam Hussein in Iraq to commemorate that war. And it is a brick structure completely covered in ceramic glazed tiles. So, more tiles, more walls, more panels. The little chapel of Madonna del Bagno in Deruta, Italy is very interesting because Deruta is a ceramic town. Most people living in that small town make ceramics. So when something happens in their life, they put an ex voto to thank the Virgin Mary or another saint for helping them with a sickness or an accident. You know, this guy was hit by a car when he was riding his bicycle, so he painted an ex voto to thank the Virgin Mary to have protected him in this moment of danger. And there are hundreds of those ex votos dating back all the way to the Renaissance to today in that small church in Italy. This is a large mural of porcelain made in Dresden porcelain at Meissen, and it was made in porcelain to replace a fresco that was eventually destroyed. So the fresco didn't last very long in the rain and wind and weather of Germany, but the porcelain tile mural, which has been there for a few centuries now, is still looks fresh and intact. And then we have to move on to China and Asia. And an example of tile making brick from the Han Dynasty. Again, from the Han Dynasty, a brick building and a city plan on a tile that would have been embedded in a building. And then the extraordinary Great Wall of China. And when I went to China and we visited the Great Wall, I was completely convinced that the Great Wall was a masonry building made out of rocks and stones. And it's only when I got closer to it I realized that those are bricks. They're actually fired clay bricks. And the Great Wall of China is the largest ceramic object in the world. And then while we were in China visiting the countryside, we came across this husband and wife team building tiles, making tiles. And I have a series of photographs showing you how those tiles are made. So digging the clay on site, they build this sort of rectangular block of clay, and then using a tool they can cut a slab from the top. This slab is then slapped over a wood and fabric tool to create a tapered cylinder. And then the wife takes the tool outside, she sets it on the ground, and then she can remove the interior wood structure by removing one of its elements and then pulling out the fabric, and the tiles stand on the ground waiting in the sun to dry. But the tool, the wood tool, also has a ridge strategically placed in 3 places on the cylinder. So after the cylinder has dried, if it's tapped lightly with a piece of wood, it will break in 3 tiles that are then fired on site and used for the roofs of China for millenniums. I also very much like those 2 structures that I photographed in Jingdezhen, China. One is a latrine made out of recycled plaster molds, and the one on the right is an incinerator to the burning of garbage, made with the millions of little porcelain discs they are making every day for the firing of very delicate porcelain objects in kilns. So instead of throwing them out, they were stacked strategically to create a chimney and a flue effect for the burning of garbage. This is a Kang bed in China as well. It is a structure built out of bricks under which you can have a fire burning to warm up the surface over which people sleep at night. And then there are a large number of pagoda built out of bricks all over China. This is the Small Goose Pagoda in Xi'an on the left, and at the time it was the tallest brick structure in the world. The White Goose Pagoda also in Xi'an. The Baoensi Pagoda in Nanjing, which was built out of white porcelain tiles coming from Jingdezhen. It was known as the White Pagoda for that reason. It was destroyed in the 19th century. This is a digital reconstruction on the left, and there is a new building at this site built recently in Nanjing, China, and beautifully lit at night. It's a completely brand new building. And on the right you have example of the remnants of the tiles used in the making of that building at the museum in Nanjing. So I'm showing you again many different towers and palaces and pagodas and so on all over China that incorporate bricks and ceramic in all kinds of inventive and exciting ways in the construction of those things. So let's go to Myanmar, previously called Burma, and this is the largest brick structure in the world. It is basically a solid structure. It has almost no empty interior space. And what happens is that when people have gone to that building for centuries and centuries, they would bring bricks with them, and the bricks would be added on and added on and added on, sort of like an onion skin over an onion skin, to create what is now have become the largest brick structure in the world. An example of a temple from India with beautifully carved brick surfaces. The chimney at Hampton Court in England, in London, are very extraordinary. There are many chimneys on that building, and each one is distinctive and made with brick in a very unusual way. Myanmar is completely covered with thousands of those stupas built with bricks. This is an image of a stove kilns, which I described in the reading, so I will refer you to the reading and keep this image in mind when you do so to understand what I'm talking about. In the Art Nouveau period, there was a resurgence of the use of ceramic in Europe as well. This is two examples here by two different architects using ceramics in the Art Deco style. Hector Guimard was the designer of the Paris subway, the earliest stations and kiosk for the exit of the passengers. And he was using lava rock, which is a type of volcanic rock that can be glazed and refired in a kiln to fuse the glaze to the surface and create wonderful decoration, of which this is an example. Castel Béranger in Paris is a building by Guimard incorporating a lot of ceramics, including lava rock glazed tiles. Otto Wagner in Vienna, working again in the Art Nouveau period with wonderfully beautiful polychromes glazed ceramic tiles. And in Paris, there is an hotel called Hôtel Céramique. And if you go to Paris, you may want to go stay there. It was designed by Camille Alaphilippe and Jules Lavirotte, and it is still open today as an hotel, and it is covered inside and out with ceramic tiles. In Vancouver, we have the Go Ballet building on Main Street and downtown the Bay building, which are covered in glazed terracotta imitating stone. And of course, the Marine building, maybe the most beautiful building in Vancouver, built out of bricks, covered with terracotta details and ceramic tiles inside and out. The lobby is particularly beautiful. And getting close to the end here, I refresh your memory of the Otsuka Museum of Art in Naruto City, Japan, where famous work of arts have been reproduced to scale on ceramic tiles. And you have the Sistine Chapel here at this museum in Japan. All of what you're looking at here that's polychrome is ceramic. The Scrovegni Chapel from Giotto, originally in Padua, Italy, here reconstructed all in ceramics at the Otsuka Museum. And then those two wonderful plates by Picasso, combining architecture with domestic objects in quite a sophisticated and wonderful way. And the very last image for today, this brick mover carrying brick on his bicycle in India. So this is it for ceramic and architecture. I will see you next week for the next presentation on the use of text and writings and script in ceramics, and I look forward to see you then. Have a good week. Bye.